Week 9 of the fantasy football season. Here's wide receiver start sits every matchup this week. Thursday night, Houston Texans at the New York Jets. Tank Dell, he's going to be a start in this one. Stephon Diggs, he got hurt from contact knee injury. And when that happens, obviously it's usually an ACL or even a sprain, best case scenario. So with the quick turnaround on Thursday night, see Diggs playing in this ball game, even if he's not out for the season, and it's a big hit for the Houston Texan team. Even though in Week 10 it looks like Nico Collins is returning, Tank Dell now going to operate as the number one wide receiver. He found the end zone last week, and Robert Woods, Xavier Hutchinson, John Mechie III are going to be mixed into the lineup as well. But we have to see more out of those guys before I put any of them in the starting lineup. So Tank Dell's a start, even though he's not really a number one wide receiver. He's more of a slot and third receiver type of player. The way he plays the game is Tank Dell. But this week you give him the start, and those other receivers, like I mentioned, unproven besides Robert Woods, even though we know he's at the latter part where he's a sit. Garrett Wilson, Davante Adams, both starts for me. I know Adams so far, he hasn't looked great for this New York Jet team, and Garrett Wilson, he's still putting up numbers, making plays. Him and Rodgers, they definitely got the timing and the rapport down, but a terrible season it's been for the New York Jets at 2-6. But this week, Thursday night, we know a lot of defense isn't played, and the secondary is definitely leaky. It's a start. Dallas Cowboys at the Falcons. CeeDee Lamb, he finally had that monster ball game. We went over 130 yards and found the end zone twice with 13 catches for the Dallas Cowboys. So this week, a good matchup at the Falcons. Secondary can't stop anyone. And like I said, CeeDee Lamb, maybe it's time breaks out once again, and he's got his legs under him after holding out all the training camp, where he had some decency games this year, but he exploded in last week's ball game in the tough loss at San Francisco. Jalen Tolbert to sit. I know Tolbert, he showed some flashes on and off so far this season, but this Cowboy offense, besides CeeDee Lamb and Jake Ferguson, are going to be inconsistent all season long, so he's a sit. Drake London, Darnell Mooney starts. His secondary can't stop anyone. Even if DaRon Bland returns to the lineup for this Dallas Cowboy team, I don't think it matters, because they just can't stop people. We saw it the last couple weeks. They're giving up tons of points. Last two games, 77 points this Cowboy team's giving up. Drake London, Darnell Mooney starts. I know London had an off game last week, only 4 catches, 34 yards, but he's going to bounce back. This Cowboy secondary can't stop anyone. DaRon Bland, even if he returns to the lineup, I don't think it makes much of a difference. And London and Kirk Cousins this season, they've had a good rapport. So one off game, I think he bounces back. Darnell Mooney a start for me as well. Mooney's been pretty solid for the most part this season, even though he's had his big games versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers this season, over 20 fantasy points in 2 matchups versus the Bucs. But Mooney's a speed wide receiver. He's got good hands, good yard after catch play. And the Dallas Cowboys all season long have had trouble with wide receivers like that. So this week, he's definitely a start. Is Darnell Mooney. And the Broncos at the Baltimore Ravens, Courtland Sutton, he went over 100 yards in last week's game, even though it was the Carolina Panthers. And Bo Nix, he's starting to get more comfortable in the offense, hit his wide receivers, make plays, and use his legs as well as mobility. So Bo Nix, he's looked good, no doubt about it. But this week, a tougher matchup for this Denver Bronco team. I know this Raven defense is definitely leaky, and they've won a lot of shootouts this season so far. But Sutton at best is a flex. Devon Vele, Troy Franklin, both sits. We haven't seen enough consistency week in and week out for both these players to go out there and be fantasy options. And also, they're available in over 90% of fantasy leagues. So we have to see more in this Denver passing game. But Bo Nix definitely improving as the weeks go on. In his rookie year, Zay Flowers a start. Another 100-yard game for Zay Flowers. And he's the number one target in this offense for this Baltimore Raven team. So Flowers, him and Lamar Jackson have a good rapport. Good yard after catch guy. You could use him in different ways. And even in a tough matchup where Patrick Surtain most likely on him, I still would give him the nod. He would just drop down a little bit in the rankings. Rashad Bateman a sit. Bateman, he was solid for a few weeks in a row. Last week, only 1 catch, 28 yards. And he dropped one in the sun. That would have been a huge game for the more Raven team. And the other thing with Bateman, he's a big yard after catch player, but he doesn't get a lot of targets. He don't get a lot of catches. And this week in a tougher matchup, he's a sit. Vegas Raiders at the Cincinnati Bengals. Jacoby Myers a start in this one, the number one target in the offense. Last week, a nice game for Myers. And this Bengals secondary just isn't that good. They give up tons of points. We saw the Eagles go up and down the field versus them last week. And I think Myers, he could carve out another decent role as a back-end 2 receiver flex option. Trey Tucker a sit. We just haven't seen enough out of Trey Tucker week in and week out. And pretty much this offense is Bowers, Myers and maybe a little Alexander Madison, but not productive numbers besides Bowers' consistency. Trey Tucker, I know, is number 2 wide receiver after Adams got traded a few weeks ago to the New York Jets, but even in a good matchup, can't trust him. He's a sit. Jamar Chase, T. Higgins starts in this one. Jamar Chase, we know he's a top wide receiver once again this season. This offseason, he's going to get a big contract either from Cincinnati or another team. And this week versus a weak Raiders secondary, he's going to go out there and have a big ball game. I believe it's Jamar Chase. T. Higgins, he got hurt last week in practice. He didn't play, obviously, on Sunday. And if he does return in this one, it's a nice start to put T. Higgins in your lineup. He's a good route runner. He's on a contract season as well, franchise tag. And he was putting up good numbers with T. Higgins before he went down with injury. So this week, if he's back, he's a start. Patriots, not much going on in the passing game. And also now with Jacoby Brissett most likely starting this week with Drake May in concussion protocol. The Mario Douglas, Jalen Polk, Keyshawn Bote, they were all sits. I know they came back, won the game. What a comeback it was with Brissett at quarterback with a minute and a half left to drive down and beat the New York Jets. But these wide receivers aren't consistent. The passing game isn't great. And pretty much the only players with value on this New England Patriot team is Stevenson and Hunter Henry. So in a matchup at Tennessee, I know their defenses got torched the last 2 weeks, but in games like this is where their defense is solid. So they were all sits. Calvin Ridley, a flex option. He finally broke out. 143 yards in that game was Calvin Ridley. And now with Hopkins out of town, he's easily the number 1 target in this offense. And Mason Rudolph and Ridley have actually had a decent rapport. But if they go back to Will Levis, numbers definitely could drop off once again. So Ridley at best is a flex option. Tyler Boyd is it now the number 2 wide receiver for this Tennessee Titan team. I know Westbrook-Ikhine found the end zone in last week's ball game with Detroit, but Tyler Boyd's a veteran. He knows how to run the routes. He knows how to play the game the right way, even though there's a possibility he could get traded as well, Tyler Boyd, where this Titan team's obviously out of it. So we'll see what happens on that front, but he's a sit. New Orleans Saints at the Panthers. Chris Olave, he returned from concussion, over 100 yards in that ball game with the Chargers, and no one else pretty much did anything in that offense. I know Derek Carr possibly could return, but Chris Olave, when healthy, he's one of the better wide receivers, I believe, in the league. He's a start in a good matchup at the Panthers. Deontay Johnson, he was out in last week's game. We'll see if he returns. And we'll also see if he gets traded as well before the NFL trade deadline in the next few weeks, where we know teams need wide receivers. So this is a pretty decent matchup. New Orleans, the last few weeks, their defense has been getting gashed, and Deontay Johnson has started. Xavier Legette, have to see a little bit more out of him. I know he's found the end zone 2 out of 3 weeks, but the receptions and yards have been low for Xavier Legette. But at least he's showing something for this Carolina Panther team. We know he's a big wideout, first-round pick from the Panthers in the NFL draft. But like I said, you have to see more out of him. But 12-team leagues or deeper, he should be owned. And the Dolphins at the Buffalo Bills, Tyreek Hill, until they got off to a big start in that game, and then he slowed down with Tyreek Hill. And we know he's not 100% with the foot, but this week a division matchup. I know the Dolphins, they're way back there in the division. This is pretty much their season here. But Tyreek Hill, he shows up in these type of ball games, so he's a start. Jalen Waddle, he's a flex option. It's just been a bad year all around once again for Jalen Waddle. So 2 years in a row, numbers dropping off, especially this season. I know this whole offense was affected big time when Tua was out of the lineup. But Jalen Waddle, he's not getting enough separation, and he's dropping some balls as well. So this week at best, he's a flex option. Amari Cooper, Khalil Shakir, Keon Coleman, all starts. And Josh Allen, this is a great receiving core. I know Cooper last week, he didn't do much in that ball game at all, pretty much non-existent. But that's just been the thing throughout Cooper's career. On the road, he disappears and he don't put up numbers, but this week I think he bounces back. This is a good matchup. Miami, they can't really stop anyone defensively. We saw it last week. Marvin Harrison, Michael Wilson, big games. So Cooper bounces back. Khalil Shakir, over 100 yards last week. One of the best wide receivers in the slot in all pro football. And he can make plays, and he's got great hands where he barely drops any balls, and he catches pretty much anything in the vicinity. And Shakir, Keon Coleman to start. The last 2 weeks he's gone out there and put up numbers, and I've said this in other videos, with Cooper there getting number 1 corner attention, Keon Coleman has those one-on-one matchups, and he's beaten most secondaries number 2 corner. So Keon Coleman, since the Cooper trade the last 2 weeks versus Tennessee in week 7, he had 4 catches, 125 yards. And then last week at Seattle, 5 catches, 70 yards, and he found the end zone. So Keon Coleman, he's a great wide receiver, I believe. He's getting better as the weeks go on. And when you're playing an offense with Josh Allen, if you can't improve, obviously that's on the wide receiver. So he's getting better weekly. And a good matchup this week. Chargers at the Browns. Ladd McConkey coming off a monster 2-touchdown performance for this Los Angeles Charger team. And this week, it's a pretty good matchup at the Cleveland Browns. Their defense hasn't been good this season, where last year, one of the best units in the league. So Ladd McConkey, he's going to get peppered with targets. Quentin Johnson, Joshua Palmer, they've pretty much been non-impact this season. I know Johnson's been out over the last few weeks, but even in return in this ball game, he's a sit. Joshua Palmer, same thing. So McConkey, the number 1 target on this offense, and he's a nice slot guy for this Charger team, where he can make plays on the outside in the seam. And this week at the Browns, where they could put some points on the board, he's a start. Cedric Tillman, a start for this Brown team. 2 big games in a row since he's gotten an expanded role. And him and Winston have a good rapport, where they were with the second team all season long until recently with the injuries and the Amari Cooper trade. So Tillman coming off for 2 games with 18 or more fantasy points in PPR leagues. He's a start. Jerry Jeudy, Elijah Moore are sits. I know that we've seen some flashes from these 2 wide receivers over the last couple weeks, but they're just too inconsistent, and there's still 15 games on the slate this week where these are wide receivers I'm not going to play over, obviously, the proven guys or even the young and up-and-coming guys. With Jeudy, you know what you're going to get from him. 1 big week, and then weeks in a row he don't do much. And Elijah Moore, he's had some opportunities, and his numbers haven't been all that great. Washington Commanders at the New York Giants. Terry McLaurin, he's a start each and every week. Him and Jaden Daniels, they've been on the same page over the last 6 weeks. And this Commander team, they've been playing great football this season. And Jaden Daniels, Rookie of the Year, and possibly be in the MVP voting. So Terry McLaurin, good matchup at the Giants, a team he's on throughout his career. He's a start. Noah Brown, the hero last week on that Hail Mary tip deflection. He caught it in the back of the end zone, but he's a sit. I've said it week in and week out, McLaurin, the only wide receiver with value on this Commander team, where these other wide receivers, they're getting a timeshare at the snaps, it seems like, between Zacchaeus, Noah Brown, and Luke McCaffrey. I know Brown caught that Hail Mary game-winning touchdown last week, but he hasn't done much with this Commander team, and none of these players have consistent value to be on the roster this year. Malik Neighbors, Wan'Dale Robinson, pretty good 1-2 combo. Only if they had a better quarterback was this New York Giant team. They definitely could take the next steps. And Malik Neighbors, one of the best rookies we've seen come out in the last 5-10 seasons. The impact he's had on the game, I know the numbers have dropped off just a bit, but he wasn't going to keep playing at that crazy level, and that concussion cost him a couple games as well. But this week in a beatable secondary, he's a must-start. Wan'Dale Robinson, he's a PPR machine, good yards after catch player, good underneath the route runner. And this could be a game where they're trailing early and often, and this New York Giant team have to play catch-up and throw the football. Jaguars at the Eagles, Brian Thomas is a start. I know Brian Thomas, he got banged up in that ball game, but easily now he's going to get more targets for this Jaguar team. Broken collarbone for Christian Kirk out for the season. Tess Thomas, a big-time wide receiver. Him and Lawrence have made plays all season long, so he's a start if he plays. Gabe Davis banged up as well in last week's ball game versus the Green Bay Packers, but we haven't seen much from Davis all season. And even with the Kirk injury, I don't think it makes much of a difference. He's a sit. A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith weekly, they're locked in. I know some weeks they're going to have down weeks or not put up big numbers, but these wide receivers could pop off at any time. And this week in a great matchup versus the Jacksonville Jaguar, where their secondary can't stop anyone, these wide receivers are must-starts. And this Eagle offense, they're starting to get things going over the last 2-3 weeks. Chicago Bears at the Arizona Cardinals. DJ Moore start. I know the last 2 weeks on the double-digit fantasy points for DJ Moore, but once him and Caleb Williams really get on the same page, I think he's going to break out with a big game. And I also said he was a buy low candidate this week as well. So this week in a good matchup at the Cardinals, where their secondary is one of the worst in the league, I believe, in a potential shootout in Arizona. He's a star. Keenan Allen, Rome Odunze, just Caleb Williams. He's not consistent enough in his rookie season to get everyone the football week in and week out. So Keenan Allen, he's been a bust all season long for the Chicago Bear team. Pretty much 1 or 2 good games he's gone out there and had numbers. The rest, non-existent. He's a sit. Rome Odunze, it's only his rookie season, and pretty much it's been one big game for him at the Indianapolis Colts in week 3, over 100 yards. So he's a sit. Marvin Harrison is a start. last week a big game. I know the first half he didn't do nothing, but the second half he got going and he put up a monster game. Was Marvin Harrison finding the end zone and getting over 100 yards. So this week, tougher matchup, good secondary, no doubt about it, the Chicago Bears. I still think he goes out there and has a good game as a start. Michael Wilson, he found the end zone last week at the Miami Dolphins. Then he was limping a little bit towards the end of that game, so we'll see if he plays. But even if he does, and even though he scored a touchdown, he's a sit. Rams at the Seahawks, division matchup. This could be a potential shootout. Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua returned last week to the lineup, and both these players had an immediate impact, obviously. Kupp found the end zone, had 16 fantasy points in PPR leagues, and Puka Nacua went over 100 yards through the air. So he's a start versus a bad secondary this season. Seattle Seahawks, DK Metcalf a start. We'll see if he's back in this game, but he was trying to push last minute to play in last week's game versus the Buffalo Bills. But obviously he didn't play, and they got blown out anyway with Seattle. But if Metcalf's back, he's a start. Jackson Smith-Njigba, Tyler Lockett with an expanded role last week. They couldn't do much. I know this Ram defense isn't all that great, but JSN, he hasn't been consistent this season. It's one big game, two bad games, and then back to the big game. So we'll see what he does this week, but I can't trust these guys. And this Seattle offensive line has had problems blocking for Geno as well, where he don't have much time in the pocket. So they're both sits, and Lockett, we know he's up there in age. We know his better years are behind him, and he's been an inconsistent option as well. Lions at the Packers, great division matchup this week. Amon-Ra St. Brown, he's a start each and every week. Last week he didn't have to do much. He had his one touchdown. The special teams and the defense pretty much did all the work in the running game for the Lions. But this game's going to be close. Jordan Love in the lineup or not, we know these teams are going to put up points. And St. Brown needs a start each and every week. Jaden Reed is started. I know the last 2 weeks the numbers have dropped off, but now with Malik Willis most likely in the lineup this week. Jaden Reed and Willis have a good rapport. Going back early in the season, Reed was pretty much the only consistent option in the passing game for Green Bay. Romeo Doubs a flex the last couple weeks ever since he got suspended. Dobbs has gone out there and he's had some good ball games, including a 2-touchdown game. Going back to week 7 was Romeo Doubs, but this week he's a flex option. This whole offense takes a hit, obviously with Jordan Love out of the lineup most likely, and Christian Watson, Dontayvion Wicks, 2 inconsistent wide receivers, and now with Willis most likely on the center this week. They're not going to see many targets and not going to put up numbers. Indianapolis Colts at the Minnesota Vikings. Josh Downs and Richardson finally connected on big plays last week, but we have to see a little bit more before 100% put Josh Downs in the lineup. So he's a flex option this week, and we know he's a big play wide receiver. We know a great yard after catch wide receiver as well. But like I said, we have to see more because Anthony Richardson, he don't throw the football a lot, and his completion percentage isn't good at all, where this cold offense all season long has taken a hit with Anthony Richardson in there at quarterback. Michael Pittman, he's a sit. Him and Richardson just have no rapport, and he's been one of the busts all season long is Michael Pittman. Last week, only 1 catch for 16 yards, so he's not doing much. Alec Pierce, he's been a deep ball threat or nothing for this Indianapolis Colts team. He's a sit. Pretty much Downs has some value, and obviously Jonathan Taylor for this Colts team. Everyone else hasn't done much. Justin Jefferson, he's a start each and every week. My opinion, best wide receiver in the league. Last week, it seemed like he didn't even do much, and he had 115 yards in the loss at the Rams. So this week, a good matchup with the Colts coming to town. He's a start. Jordan Addison, a sit. He's been inconsistent, no doubt about it, this season, is Jordan Addison. Besides the big game early in the year, Green Bay, we had 2 touchdowns. He hasn't had double-digit fantasy points besides the 1 game, so I know it's a good matchup versus the Colts. But this offense with TJ Hockenson possibly returning as well this week, that's more targets off the table for Addison. So he's a sit. And the final game of the week, Monday night, Tampa Bay Bucks at the Kansas City Chiefs. Jalen McMillan, he's a flex option. Last week, 9.60 fantasy points. We know Mike Evans, he's going to be out a couple more weeks. We know Godwin out for the season. And someone's got to catch the football over there for this Tampa Bay Bucs team. And McMillan looked like he was the number 1 target on the offense. So he's a flex. Sterling Shepard, Trey Palmer, they're sit options for me this week. This is a tough matchup versus one of the best defenses in the league. And Baker Mayfield, Cade Otton's been the number 1 target in the passing game with the last couple weeks since the injuries. With McMillan's been the number 2 target. At Palmer, he didn't show much. 2 catches, 29 yards last week. And Sterling Shepard got banged up as usual with the hamstring injury, and he didn't show much as well. So both those receivers are sits. DeAndre Hopkins, I think he'll get down the playbook. I think he'll play more snaps in this ball game. I know last week only 2 catches in that ball game for D-Hop. But like I said, once he gets the playbook under him, and this is a great matchup versus one of the worst secondaries in all pro football, he's a start. Xavier Worthy, a flex. If he don't score that touchdown weekly, the targets haven't been there, the receptions haven't been there for Xavier Worthy. And I know he's been a good gadget guy for this offense, but he's tough to trust, especially with 15 games on the slate. So that's wide receiver, start, sit, every matchup for week 9 of the fantasy football season.